Under the Trump administration, we saw fewer U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East combat zones, while at the same time defeating ISIS and negotiating the Abraham Accords. So does the Biden administration's sudden policy change mark a turn back to the sort of endless embroilment in foreign conflict that we saw under the Obama administration?
Well, I'm afraid it just might be that very thing. And I mean, you have the Doha Agreement, which gets the U.S. out. Taliban will continue to prevent some terrorist activity. And then there was a separate agreement between the Taliban and the Afghan government. So we know for 20 years we've been there, and nation building has been abject failure. They're not going to be a democracy. They're not going to look like a constitutional republic. And for us to spend more money and, more importantly, more human lives just doesn't make sense. We should be out of there. That's what I truly believe most Americans would say to do today.
And to your point about lives being saved when it comes to U.S. combat troops in Afghanistan, since those agreements were signed in Doha last year, about a little more than a year actually, no U.S. combat deaths in Afghanistan. And yet, if we were to stay past the May 1st deadline, the Taliban is saying that they'll go back to what they call a war footing. Are you concerned about that we could become re-engaged once again with the Taliban if we stay past the May 1st deadline?
Yeah, I really am. When you think about it, we made an agreement. And just because there's a change in our administration doesn't mean we shouldn't adhere to the agreement that we made. And as you say, to the extent that the Taliban has kept its word, no attacks on American troops over there, that's positive. And even though that it's been a little bit rocky between the Afghani government and the Taliban, they continue to talk. They continue to negotiate and try to work out their differences. If we are there, what we do is we say, you know what, we didn't keep our word, which allows everybody to step away and not keep their word. And if we leave, as we said we would, we get to have the upper hand, put leverage on them diplomatically. And that's probably a far better way for us to do things.
So is that what you would like to see the Biden administration moving forward do, is to use the diplomatic tools at its hands, at its disposal, using sanctions, for example, instead of actually having boots on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, why are we participating in endless wars? I mean, when you think about it, I mean, 20 years. I mean, there's a whole generation of Americans who've never known us except for being at war in Afghanistan. That doesn't even make sense. And nothing, and I hate to say this because we've lost so much blood and treasure, and these people are noble heroes, but the reality is we haven't seen sustainability in our objectives. We haven't seen nation building has been, like I said, a disaster. And also, there's not been stability put in that region. But where President Trump was successful is like the Abraham Accords, which has brought stability and will bring stability and will bring regional balancing against Iran. That's the type of thing that needs to be happening if you have a true leader in foreign policy. And that's being tough, like President Trump was, and yet also using the diplomatic tools at your disposal.
And going back to something you mentioned earlier, it's something President Trump used to say all the time, that we're not the world's police force, and we shouldn't be. Our original goal going into Afghanistan was to topple the Taliban because they were providing safe harbor to al-Qaeda after 9/11. And now here we are 20 years later, and that original mission has morphed into all sorts of different things. It's become very vague. It's just any terror group in general. And here we have the congressionally appointed the Afghanistan Study Group. They released their final report within the last month. And what they're saying is they want the Biden administration to push back the deadline. But it's interesting as to why. They say it's because if we're to leave by May 1st, that could provoke a civil war within Afghanistan. And I hate to say it, but that's not our problem. That's not why our guys are there to keep the peace. If they can't keep the peace themselves, I don't really see how that's America's problem.
No, you're exactly right. And the original authorization to use military force that have been in place for almost 20 years, they didn't say we're going to allow our troops to go in to quell a potential civil war. They said al-Qaeda and the terrorists that attacked us at the towers. That's what we were talking about, and that's what all Americans expected. Well, you're right. We should come out. And there are other times when we've pulled out and we've seen a war emerge, such as Vietnam. There was this continuation of the hostilities, but then what happened is they stabilized. And now they're an ally of ours. If not an ally, at least a trading partner and somebody that we can have a reciprocal arrangement with. That is not going to happen as long as we are there, because we are essentially putting our men and women in harm's way Uh, to solve what? To solve what problem? A problem that is uniquely belonging to the Afghanis, not to us.
You're exactly right. And here we have troops that may not be withdrawn from Afghanistan by May. And of course, now we're hearing the Pentagon saying they may put more troops now into Iraq as well. What are you hearing from your constituents? I like how you end your letter to the Biden White House. You're saying that it would be very popular for the families of Mesa, Arizona, in the same way for Scranton, Pennsylvania, to in many ways bring our boys home.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rationale for us to extend into Iraq either. I mean, that was another failed nation-building exercise. And I'm afraid to say that the Biden administration carries forward some of the Obama administration war hawks in their positions of leadership. And that's very concerning to me because that's not America's job. That's one of the reasons President Trump was so successful, both with foreign policy, but also in conveying that domestically. We don't want to be all over the place. We want to be the world's strongest military power, and we want to be so strong that people don't want to mess with us. And at the same time, we can use that power to leverage diplomatically to try to provide stability when it's in America's interest to do so, but not put our troops in harm's way when it's not in our interest to do so.
And going back just a week or two ago, we saw the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and she received a question about President Trump's foreign policy, and she basically said, "Don't worry, we're going to do the complete opposite of that. Biden won't take any part of President Trump's foreign policy." And it's funny how she was trying to say that as an assurance, and yet President Trump left the Middle East much more peaceful than how he found it. And so I'm very concerned that that is the guiding principle here of the Biden administration: is anything Trump did, said, or touched is now to be seen as bad, and they're going to do the complete opposite, which really does concern me, especially how this is really in many ways Obama's third term. So we saw the failed missions in Syria and in Libya and what we saw there. So very concerning. But Congressman Biggs, thank you so much for joining us tonight.